Story by Voice in the Quiet Night. He'd been following me for the last 10 minutes. It all started when I'd exited the parking lot of the law office and drove onto the road. He had been driving in the opposite lane, but the second he had seen me, he immediately pulled a U-turn to get in behind me. Now as I flicked my turn signal for the exit off the highway, he too, almost in unison, flicked his signal on. I took the exit, and he did the same. His LED headlights were especially blinding in my rearview mirror, which was made even worse because he was riding my bumper and it was pouring rain outside. I glanced at my watch. 1 a.m. I had a huge day in court tomorrow and had stayed late preparing everything. Maybe that's it, I whispered, as I stole another glance into the rearview, squinting under the brightness. The sky had been on me the second I'd left the office, which meant he must know who I was. Was he one of the thugs I'd prosecuted years back, fresh out on parole and hungry for revenge? I squinted into the bright lights again and tried to make out some identifying features of the driver, but all I could see was a dim silhouette. I racked my brain, trying to remember if any of the guys I'd put away recently had been released, but came up empty-handed. I took a deep breath and calmed myself. I was just being paranoid. Yes. The stress from the big anti-corruption case was clearly taking its toll. I took a right off the main road and he followed me. My stomach sank. The big case. Now it made sense. This guy must have been hired to shut me up before the trial began. I glanced at my watch again. It had been 15 minutes. I was only 5 minutes from my house. I grabbed my phone and started to call 911, but then he started blaring his horn at me. I jumped in my seat, and then the phone went flying. I swiped for it, but it wedged in between the passenger seat and the door. For God's sakes, the man kept blaring his horn at me. My heart seized with every blast. I slammed the gas pedal and took off desperately, trying to get away from this madman. He in turn floored it and followed after me. His car was faster than mine, and soon he was riding my bumper again despite the high speed. I was almost home. Once there, I could run inside, lock the door, and call the police. My neighbor had a gun, I think. Maybe. I pulled into the neighborhood and flew past the houses, going double the speed limit. Almost there. I reached the cul-de-sac, and the well-lit street finally cast enough light onto the pursuer's face. His face was crazed, with eyes stretched open and lips grimacing. Finally, I reached my house. I slammed the brakes, forcing him to cut left real quick to avoid an accident, nearly colliding with a parked car. He spun out into the cul-de-sac, and his tires squealed in agony. I ripped open my car door and sprinted for the front door, howling for my family to call the police. Half the neighborhood was awake now, and heads were poking out from every door because of the commotion. I tore the front door open, almost running into my terrified family, who were already dialing 911. We locked the door and looked out the window. The man staggering out of his car and ran across our lawn. My wife screamed. I flung open the shoe closet and grabbed the only weapon I could think of, a baseball bat. The man reached our doorstep, and I gritted my teeth. Then, he suddenly turned away and sprinted across our lawn back to his car before peeling out. It was all over, in seconds. Stunned, I stepped towards the door and unlocked it. Before pulling it open, on the doorstep was a sheet of paper. He'd left a note. I picked up the note and raised it into the light. In the distance, I heard sirens approaching. I read the note. It was in your back seat. My son suddenly grabbed my arm. Dad, I think there's someone in the house. Story by B. Robin Hood 01. This happened in my childhood neighborhood when I had just turned 18. I used to ride my bike around the neighborhood for hours at a time and listen to music. It was my escape from reality, as opposed to reading or playing video games. My neighborhood was a circle, similar to a cul-de-sac, except there were 2 points of entry to the neighborhood, and there were houses on the inner and outer side of the circle. I had been riding my bike there daily since I was probably 13. I never had any problems then, only the random fast-driving car or runaway dog, but no shady people. Anyways, I was riding my bike around the block like normal and saw that a neighbor was having her driveway redone. I thought nothing of it and passed the house a few more times before one of the men working flagged me down and stopped me. I was raised way too polite and honestly was a little socially dumb, so I didn't think anything of it and engaged in conversation with the two men, staying cautious by keeping distance and foot on the pedal in case I had to bolt. They asked me a few joking questions and I responded as politely yet bluntly as I could before excusing myself and biking back home, which my house was visible from the neighbor's house. My dad kept guns in the house and I knew how to use them in an emergency, so I didn't think twice about them knowing. A few days pass and I'm biking around the block again. As I turn a corner, I see one of the guys parked in my driveway, a gold car, with a dual rear-sided mirrors, like what some cop cars have. I felt a pit form in my stomach as I passed my house, trying not to show I was freaked out. I came back around the back side of the neighborhood and saw that he had moved to the house he had been working on. He parked in the middle of the road and got out of the car. Both his driver and back driver's side doors were open, and he stopped me. Once again, being the naive idiot I was, I stopped but kept my distance like before. He asked if I wanted to go to lunch with him, and I said no thank you, and that my dad was waiting for me at home. He said that he didn't see my dad's truck, which was true. He wasn't home at the time, and I said he had parked it in the garage, and that he was working on it, and said I'd help. I pedaled off as fast as I could. I never saw his car again, but I still get freaked out anytime I see a car that has the dual rearview mirrors. I told my parents about it that night, and they said I should have gone to lunch with him. Joking or not, I was not okay, and that made me feel so much worse. Story by Isabel_512. It was a nice autumn night, and my family and I decided to have a campfire. We went outside after it was dark, and we were roasting marshmallows and making s'mores while we sat around the campfire talking. The campfire was at the edge of the woods by our playground, which was quite far from our house since we had a lot of acres. We had spent time outside at night before, and everything was okay. But this night, we spent a few hours outside, and then suddenly we heard something in the woods. We heard leaves crunching and a stick break. We thought it was an animal, so we ignored it. We went back to talking, and then we heard it again. It sounded like it was getting closer and closer. The footsteps didn't sound like an animal, and instead it sounded like a human. Then we heard someone cough in the woods. My family and I all stood there in silence, because we were freaked out. We shined our flashlights into the woods to see who or what was there. We saw a dark figure of a man hide behind a tree. They were watching us. We were all scared, and until this day I have no idea who that was watching us or what they would have done to us if we hadn't ran away. After this, we never had a campfire at night ever again, and instead, we did it during the daytime.